And good morning, everyone. It's Yvonne DeVita from sunny Binghamton, New York. And you know, I say that tongue in cheek because it's not sunny in Binghamton, New York. Not today. It was sunny yesterday, so we appreciated that. You're watching Smart Women Conversations, and my special guest this morning, Elisa Camahort Page, is a friend of mine from the early days of women in blogging. Elisa will maybe mention a little bit about that. You know, I wonder, as you're watching today, and things at this moment in time are a little uncertain in America and in the entire world, are you thinking about next steps? Are you thinking a little bit more about next week and the week after, and maybe months down the road, as we know this is going to continue in our lives? However, there are things you can do now being shared all over the place. What I want to do is talk to you about reinvention. And reinvention is something Elisa and I know a little bit about. Elisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Elisa before we continue. Elisa is the co-author of the Amazon #1 new release in political advocacy, Roadmap for Revolutionaries, Resistance, Activism, and Advocacy for All. Roadmap for Revs, and that's her hashtag, I'll share that on the blog, is a handy guidebook to help people become more effective everyday activists on behalf of the causes they care most about. Prior to writing the book, Elisa was the co-founder and COO of BlogHer, Inc., which was a groundbreaking digital media company serving women writers and influencers. And it was one of the less than 3% of companies funded by VCs that led by an all-female team, which this is remarkable, Elisa, especially when you guys founded it and even today. Elisa is a board member of Nano STEAM, that's NANOSTEAM Foundation, and our Hen House Animal Rights Media Organization, as well as an advisor for OSTIA, The What, SXSW Interactive. Her guiding principle is, now explain this a little bit for me, Elisa. Innovation plus empathy doesn't equal, it's greater than innovation and efficiency. Let's start there before we get into all the reinvention. Talk about that for me.
Yeah, that tagline, innovation plus empathy is greater than innovation plus efficiency, really came about a couple of years ago when I started to see these trends in what kinds of companies were getting funded by particularly Silicon Valley VCs. As you mentioned, BlogHer really represented a tiny portion of the funding that goes out there that goes to women. And what I started to see is that, you know, years ago, having been living and working in tech in Silicon Valley for decades, you know, the greatest minds of this valley were solving big problems, big technical problems, big world problems. But I started to see this trend, and I feel like the social web had the potential to solve great problems as well. But what I started to see is that more and more people were focused on how can I make life a little more convenient for people who are already privileged. And I say this as someone who uses Instacart and DoorDash and Lyft and Uber and Grubhub and Caviar and Postmates. I mean, I use all these apps, but let's face it, they have created this gig economy, which is economically extremely unstable for the people who work for them. And they've created convenience for people who already could afford convenience. Yes. And I think the end point for me was when I saw that a company called WAG got $1 billion valuation. WAG is a dog walking. It's a, you know, gig economy dog walking service, which basically is inserting itself as a middle person between what used to be a kind of neighborly, you know, your friend's kid walked your dog, or at its most corporate-y, I had a pet sitter who was licensed and bonded and professional, but still it was a small business. And I paid her directly and she had sitters. And now you've got this app, which I'm sure is very convenient, but is it necessary? And is
Mhm.
it changing lives and worlds? And um, and as we go and on, making life more efficient for people who can afford to make their life more efficient, what's happening to caring about some of our society's great problems? The Bay Area, where I live, has a huge income inequity problem, has a huge housing crisis,
Mhm.
big homelessness problem. It's the number one local issue. Um, and how is this, and the people who work in this county, in my county, in my area, teachers, police officers, all these gig economy workers, how are they affording to even live here? And so I just started to feel like there are ways that you can innovate that actually try to solve more important problems, and that making life convenient for me, much as I enjoy it, is not the most important problem that I hope entrepreneurs will be trying to solve.
Yes, that's really fascinating. And I find it fascinating because we who live the privileged lives that we live don't necessarily know it sometimes. Even those of us who think that we're on the forefront of understanding. And I put myself there because over the last 10 years, certainly during the Obama reign, um, and he was so smart, he was so professionally, he was so qualified, but he was also, you know, people looked at him because he was Black as if he wasn't all of those things. And I began to see and hear and learn that my own life of privilege, regardless of where I grew up or what happened to me, was something I took for granted. That was not something other people were able to. And so it's wonderful to hear all of this and to begin to understand, and certainly where you live, I think Binghamton, where I live, is a little less. Um, I live in a really actually small town called Shenango Bridge. It is hometown America. It is kids out playing, and walking the dog is no big deal. We live in a rural area. But let's talk about the concept of reinvention now, because I think we're in a place where we can help people reinvent and rethink some of the ways that they have approached both their lives, maybe their entrepreneurship, or getting out of a business or job and becoming part of, well, I call it the gig economy, but you explain to me what maybe that's not the right term.
Well, I think when I think of the gig economy, I think of all these apps where people are not treated as employees and don't have the stability or benefits of that. And and they don't, most of them, make a living wage doing one thing. You
Mhm.
can't make a living wage just driving for Uber.
Right,
You have to
right,
drive for Uber and deliver for Instacart
right.
and walk dogs with Wag. You have to cobble it together. So, and people used to call it the sharing economy. And I thought, nobody's sharing, somebody's working and a big company is giving them a pittance of the pay. And the thing is that that's different from what I think you're talking about, which is, I kind of say that I've had a portfolio career. I've done a lot of different
Yes.
things. I have to open up the book and show you, like, these are the various different things I've done. And it makes it hard to describe yourself. It makes it hard
Mhm.
to promote yourself because it's very diverse and variable what you've done, what you can do. And I think of that as a little different than the gig economy.
Okay.
But I do think we need protections, even if you want to say, okay, it's freelancing, and there have been freelance writers forever, for example,
Mhm.
or consulting, which is sort of the most elevated term,
Yep.
for the gig economy. But all of those things, I think we're finding that there are downfalls when big things happen. There's a lot of built-in instability.
Yeah.
And I think what we're also learning in this time of COVID-19 is that we are only, the most stable amongst us can only be as stable as the most unstable.
Mhm.
Because right now there are people who can't not work, and there are people who can't shelter in place,
Yeah.
and they're out there, and it's having an effect on us all. Or there are people who can't afford to go to the doctor, or there are people who can't get treatment, even if they do go and get diagnosed. And so, and they're out in society with the rest of us, and we are only as safe as the least safe person. And I think we need to move towards solving those problems as more and more people are, whether you call it gig economy, portfolio career, freelancing, or consulting.
Well, let's call some of it entrepreneurship in the sense of the umbrella is being your own boss. And I will admit, in my life of reinvention, and I reinvented myself the very first time when I left high school and went to college because I didn't want to be that person anymore. And when I decided to become an entrepreneur, I had no clue what I was doing. No one was there. There are more classes and opportunities today to learn how to be an entrepreneur and to look at exactly the things you're talking about. Where will you get your health insurance? How will you manage something if you're out of work sick for a week? Not just in the health doctorate, but just being out of work and not making money. What will
Right.
you do with all these? So I really feel like there's opportunity for many of us to help people see what might be available. And I also, let me ask you this. I feel as if we live now in a world that is beckoning for innovation, is beckoning for people to say, I'm going to do that differently, and not just to become the next Uber or the next Bitcoin or something, but something that I'm going to do differently because it's for my community and be happy. I'm happy just tool around here in my little community. I don't need to be, when you were at BlogHer, it was big. It was very, very complicated and involved. And that was part of one of your reinventions, right?
Yes.
When I did Blog Pause, it was kind of the same thing. But I'm happy now doing this, and I'm happy to help others learn how to take a talent or a hobby. And yes, you can make it something that will help support you. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of as far as opportunities in entrepreneurship.
Well, yeah, entrepreneurship, it has a trajectory just like from gig to consulting.
Yes.
You can be the person, and I know folks like this who were in corporate tech and now they teach yoga and do
Yes.
meditation online, do lead meditation online. I know people who have definitely changed their lifestyle and changed. And then I know people who left corporate and created big companies, and started small, and their goal was to change the world. But I think one of the points of our book was sort of, you can change the world, or you can change your own city. You can change your kid's school, or you can change the workplace. You can start right where you are,
Mm-hmm.
and look around for the opportunities. And so there's just such a range of what you can do. And one of the reinventions, my very first reinvention probably was when I was 25, because from the time I entered high school to about that point is when I got into theater, and I decided I wanted to do theater. And every decision, and I was very I didn't care about school. I didn't think school was important to go do theater, but I knew there were certain expectations on me to do okay. So I got through high school. I went to my local state university. I lived at home to save money because my dream was to move to New York after college. And, every choice I made was about how to get to New York right after college with money to get myself set up. And that's what I did. But after about 4 years of living there and pursuing what I thought was it for me, I kind of went, oh, I actually don't think this is it for me. And I had not planned for anything else. And I had not, I don't know, but I didn't like living in New York. I didn't like being poor and living in New York. I don't know how I would feel about it if I had money. Mm-hmm. But it's any place is hard to live if you're poor, but New York is pretty hard to live if you're poor. So so I decided to move back to California. I missed home. I missed the weather. I missed my family. I missed what I had grown up with. And I took a job assisting a commodities trader that was a friend of my family's in his office.
Wow.
Yeah, totally different. And in so doing, I learned stuff on the job, and I ended up moving from that trader to working for a firm that did accounting for commodity traders. And I ended up doing accounting, and I was math phobic in high school. So I ended up doing accounting for commodity traders. But after about 7 years in that industry, I realized that there was no job mobility because commodities is mostly all based in New York and Chicago. So I looked around, this is 1997, and I looked around and said, oh, this tech thing seems to be kind of important here in the Bay Area. Maybe I should see if I like that or if I'm any good at that. And so I just asked around. And again, I took a job as an admin in a marketing department of a tech company.
Wow.
And, just to get in and see if I liked it and if I had any aptitude for it.
Ah.
And my timing couldn't have been better. It was the beginning of the dot-com boom. Things were going crazy. If you worked hard and were smart and did have aptitude, as I learned I did, you could really advance. So, I spent about 7 years climbing this corporate ladder. But each time I wasn't afraid to kind of step back and say, okay, I don't know what I'm doing in this. Let me just take a junior level, entry level thing and figure out if I like it and figure out if I'm good at it. And then trust that if I am good at it, and if I do like it, and if I am willing to work hard, opportunity will come to me. And it did. And that's one thing I always tell people is like, if you can reinvent yourself, you have to be willing. If you're the president of whatever in your current industry and you want to go somewhere totally else, you're not going to go in as president. Like, go in as something else and learn the ropes. And maybe it will kind of not only will it help you reinvent, but it might reinvigorate, you might remind yourself you like working. I mean, because you're learning and you're doing something new and exciting, and you're not maybe jaded, which I think it's hard not to get jaded after you spend a decade in any industry, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people are just always like so surprised that I would just hop like that and take these junior roles and then figure it out. And that was just the path for me to always getting on to the next thing.
I feel like what I'm hearing is really phenomenal for my listeners to understand, because it's no matter where you go, you never know everything anyway. And in my own experience, I was not as smart as you because I didn't want to take those lower level jobs. And yet I did take like the mid-level. So I said, okay, I'll be the office manager. But first I was a veterinary technician, and not everybody knows that. So that's where my love of animals comes from. The job came from my love of animals. And like you, it wasn't what I thought it would be. Part of that was not being valued by the people I worked for. And so I actually went on and worked in a human hospital, which I said I would never, ever do because I didn't like people. I don't like people. But we worked with elderly, and I was very protective of them. I didn't like the way they were being treated. But anyway, things progressed to where they were. And the goal, and the thing I'm trying to say is exactly what you said. And when I told my son, there's an echo suddenly. My son, for a minute there, I heard an echo. After I got divorced and my son was in high school, I think I had 3 different jobs. 1, 2, 3. And he said to me, why don't you stay in a job? Why can't you hold down a job? Why can't you just get a job and stay there? And I said, I'll be darned if I'm going to stay anywhere that I'm A, unhappy, and B, not valued for my work. And so I did go to learn at other jobs like you did how to be what I wanted to become. What I wanted to become, it turned out, was my own boss.
Right. See, I never actually anticipated being my own boss. My mom was one of those prototypical second wave feminists who got married right out of college, but when I was probably around 11 or 12, went to work and found her calling as a corporate person and climbed the she started off as a part-time research assistant at this company, ended up being their first female VP, worked till she was 70. That was her, traveled all over the world. And so I just always thought I would kind of follow. Once I decided to go into business and like be a business lady, I just thought that's what I would do. But you know, when the most recent tech company that I was working for, we were going through, there was the dot-com boom and then there was the dot-com bust.
Yes.
And things really spiraled down. And I went through this phase. The company was doing layoff after layoff. And they went through a layoff where I thought for sure I was going to get laid off because it was getting so bare bones and I wasn't. And I just spent all weekend being so depressed that I had to go back. And then I said, why do you have to go back? No one's forcing you. You know, I have a necklace I wear sometimes that has a phrase on it, "You are free." And I wear it to remind myself that wherever I am, I'm actually choosing to be there and I don't have to. Mm-hmm. And that applies to relationships, that applies to jobs, that applies like, you know, and I don't mean, obviously people have obligations. I didn't have kids, you know, there's all sorts of obligations I didn't have that allowed me to be a little more flexible and free. But I also think people can plan for freedom. So I was a big money saver. And then I bought a condo by myself and then I went back to saving all my money. And so when I decided that I wasn't happy and that I didn't have to go back, I had 2 years worth of take home pay in the bank. And not because I knew what I was going to do with it, but because I wanted to be ready.
Yeah.
And so I made that freedom by doing that. You know, I knew a lot of other people during the dot-com bust who had bought houses, had gotten mortgages that were really big, and they were married to jobs they hated because there wasn't a lot of unemployment was bad. And meanwhile, I got like a little 2-bedroom condo that I felt would be manageable even if I was making less money. And I was really glad I did that because I was not over leveraged. I wish I followed more of my own advice now. I feel a little more over leveraged now than I did 20 years ago.
Well, it's interesting because I like you, I felt that freedom and that my health, my mental and physical health, depended on me being able to get up and go to whatever job it was and be happy there and be valued. And when I decided to chuck the whole corporate thing, so to speak, and become an entrepreneur, I just assumed I would be able to do it. I never for a moment thought I wouldn't be able to do it because, heck, I'm smart. I mean, I was going into, at that time, web content writing, and there was a really big need for it. And I didn't end up doing a lot of it. I did some, but I progressed to other things, as you're saying, because I kept my eye out for the opportunities. I wasn't afraid to do something that was a little risky. I'm not risky with my money. I keep it in my mattress. Well, I don't really keep it in my mattress, but that's what I tell people. But I am able to say, I don't need this job or this. When I was an entrepreneur, I don't need this gig. I don't need this client. And it was because I believed I could do it.
Well, I think that people, when you're going to try something new, I just would like to encourage people to remember that it's far more likely you won't like it than that you won't be able to do it.
There you go.
And either outcome, there's no judgment involved with either outcome. So it might not work out if you try something new. It might not be the thing. it's more likely it's because you don't like it like you thought you would than that you couldn't do it. But whether it's that you know what, I'm really not good at this, or you know what, I really don't like this, it's the same moral, it's the same ethical decision, it's the same moral decision. There's no good or bad about not liking something or not having aptitude for something. These are not things. And I think people people really judge themselves so harshly in both situations. Either try to make themselves like it or try to make themselves be good at something that just isn't. I did find I learned I could work with numbers. Like I thought I couldn't. I thought I wasn't good. I wasn't good at math. There's always something you find. I remember when I started doing the accounting portion of my job, I was like, you know what I like about this? That if you're balancing a monthly account and you're 1 penny off, if you keep at it, you will find the penny. Like it is black and white. It is a finite thing. And that's very comforting in a world, especially if you're a marketer and you're used to like, it's never, no matter how much you fine tune, you'll
right.
back the next day and edit it some more.
Yep.
There's something very comforting about, you know what, if you're a penny off, you'll find it. So
you discovered that you weren't bad at math.
I wasn't bad at math.
Thought you were bad at math.
I thought I was.
Yeah, I am not a math person. I'm not everyone knows, they pat my shoulder a lot when we talk about numbers. And I know now that it's because I chose not to be good at math. It's not because I wasn't. I chose not to because I wanted to write.
Right. And I think part of it for me was that I had an older brother and a younger sister who were both total 4.0 valedictorian math and science. Although my sister also did theater and was also sang in choir, and so she was also super creative. But they were both really, really good at that stuff, and I just didn't want to be more than anything, because I was good at math up until a certain age, and then I was like, eh. And I think that's and even with that, it's not like I look back into that and say, oh, why did you do that? That was so dumb. Like, I was a kid, I wasn't consciously making a decision to decide and think I was bad at math. Well, you get older and you figure it out,
Yeah. And I think what you said about your mom finding herself and having this corporate job, it's interesting because my mom became an entrepreneur and ran the local corner grocery store. And I had to work in it, and I hated it because you had to do math. But in the end, there's a little bit of influence there that made me believe if my mother could get a loan and start a business, a corner grocery store in the 1960s, what could I do? I shouldn't sit here and say I can't do something, because that was a darn hard thing for her to do. And
I also think that people get into hustle porn where they're like, there's a thing in Silicon Valley, and it may not be as prevalent everywhere else, but it's like when you're talking about your business, they'll say, well, is it really a business, or is it really a scalable company, or is it a lifestyle business? And I have spent the last, I don't know how many years, going to events where I tell people, hey, if you start a company that you actually build so it pays for you and your loved ones and maybe a few employees and their families to have a lifestyle that you enjoy, that sounds like heaven to me. Like, I just hate the disdain, the idea of having disdain for someone who builds a great business that supports them and their family and some employees. I mean, or even maybe not even employees, but you don't have to, not every business that gets started has to turn into a story that ends up on CNBC,
Well, and it could if it's a lifestyle business. And that's my point too, is in these times, we're coming to the end of our time together. And I hope people have taken a little bit of inspiration from the fact that I just posted on Facebook from Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And yes, that's what we're going through right now. I believe that there is light and a rainbow, and I believe that we will come out of it if we, from my perspective, you do need to educate yourself. You do need to. I'm staying home, and I have a background. My daughter's an epidemiologist, so she won't let me out the door. But in the end, there are things you can do, and I want people to think more about what they can do and less about what they can't do.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can try a lot of different things. You don't have to think of one thing you can do.
Yes.
You can think of several and experiment and play. And, I figured out in all this time that there are things I love doing for free that I actually don't like charging money for.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't like having to, there are things, especially when it comes to like basic mentorship of women entrepreneurs I like I would rather have something else that supports my lifestyle so I can mentor at my discretion when and where and who I want. Right. Is that realistic? Like, am I always in the position to do that? No, but I have discovered that I'm not going to necessarily build a business around something I'm really good at and really passionate about, but I don't necessarily want to have a business in. So that's okay. Like, you can do a lot of different things and not all of them have to make you money.
Right. And I also believe we each have a talent of some sort, and defining the word talent can be tricky also. But, I see women who have been office managers for 25 years. Now they're retired and they're going to try and do something with their photography. Great business to be in, I think, or jewelry or cake decorating, whatever it is, whatever you have. And as you say, you could build a lifestyle business or you could build a business. It's your choice, and experiment, and don't think that only one thing, you only have to do one thing your entire life. Because the reality, Elisa, is you retire and you still have 20 or 30 years, folks. So we're living that, Tom and I right now, retired and doing what we do. And so we're at the end of our time, and I just enjoyed this so much. I hope people will take a little bit of inspiration from it and learn that reinvention is something you can do over and over and over again.
Yes.
Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, Ivana. It was great talking to you.
This is Yvonne DeVita from Smart Women Conversations, and we'll see you again next week.